Eliza Dray did not flinch when she heard her husband describe her to a room full of Charleston merchants. She had been standing in the hallway outside the drawing room, with a forgotten shawl draped over her arm, about to knock, when the words came through the half-open door. Clean and unhurried, the way Calvin spoke when he was comfortable, when he was among men he trusted. "A steady hand," he said. There was warmth in it, the warmth of a man being modest about something he considered a point of pride. "That's all you need in a wife." The man who had asked, she recognized the voice as belonging to Mr. Aldridge, a cotton factor from Savannah, laughed in easy appreciation. "And she manages the accounts? The household?" "Runs it herself," Calvin said. "Never a word of complaint, never a question I have to answer twice. A steady hand, Aldridge. That's Eliza." She stood in the hallway and did not move. The candle near the stairs guttered once in a draught from the garden door. She looked down at the shawl in her hands. The fine cream wool her father had brought her from Boston 3 years before he died, and she smoothed it once across her arm with slow, deliberate fingers. Then she turned and went back upstairs. She did not cry. If you have ever been told you are dependable and felt it land like a diminishment, stay until the end of this story. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Eliza Sherwood. Eliza Dray, she reminded herself, though she still sometimes forgot. Had learned before she could properly thread a needle, that crying inside a house that did not fully belong to you accomplished nothing useful. She sat in the window seat of her dressing room, with the harbor lights coming in across the water, and she thought about the word. Steady, not clever, not capable even, which would at least have acknowledged the machinery behind the stillness. Steady, the word you used for a good horse, for a compass in weather, for something that did not deviate, did not demand, did not cost you anything beyond its maintenance. She turned her wedding ring on her finger once. Then she went to the small writing desk in the corner, unlocked the bottom drawer. The key lived on a slender ribbon tucked inside her bodice, where Calvin had never once thought to ask about it. And she took out the ledger she had been keeping since February. She was not finished yet. The Sherwood interest was not a grand operation by the standards of Boston or New York, but it was solid, and it was hers. Her father, Captain Aldwin Sherwood, had built it from 2 cargo schooners and a lease on a single berth at the north end of Charleston Harbor. By the time Eliza was 12, he had 6 vessels, 3 leased berths, and a reputation in the Carolina coastal trade for delivering cargo on schedule in weather that stopped other captains in port. He had kept the ledgers himself, in his precise mariner's hand. Every cargo weight and dollar and disputed freight claim recorded as faithfully as a ship's log. He had brought Eliza into the counting room when she was 8 years old, not to observe, to work. She had learned to read a manifest before she learned to play the pianoforte. She knew the rate schedules for coastal freight, the seasonal patterns of cargo insurance, the names of every harbor master and customs official between Savannah and Wilmington. When her father died of fever in the winter of 1828, Eliza was 23 years old, married to Calvin Dray for 14 months, and she knew every inch of what he had left her. He had left her everything. Not in the way men sometimes left daughters things, a modest bequest, a sum held in trust until some suitable gentleman could be found to manage it on her behalf. Captain Sherwood had left Eliza the vessels, the berth leases, the cargo contracts, the office on Broad Street, and a short letter in his cramped mariner's script that she had memorized down to the punctuation. Eliza, you know this business better than any man I have ever employed. The ledgers will speak for you if you let them. Trust the documents. Trust your own arithmetic. Trust that the law, imperfect as it is, cares more about what is written down than about who is standing in the room. I have made sure what is written down is correct. She had read it the afternoon of the funeral, and placed it in the locked drawer. Some things you kept not because you needed reminding, but because the paper itself was a kind of company. The morning after the dinner party, Eliza rose before Calvin, and dressed in the quiet dark and went to the small office off the back of the house, the one she had fitted out in the first year of their marriage, with her father's old sea charts pinned to the wall and the current shipping contracts filed in the mahogany cabinet she had moved there herself while Calvin was at the exchange. He had never asked about the room. He had, she thought, perhaps never fully noticed it was there. She unlocked the bottom drawer. The file she had been building since February was thin, but not thin enough to ignore. Mortimer Sherwood was her father's younger brother, 12 years his junior, a man who had spent most of his adult life moving between ventures that shone brightly for one season before going dim. He had come to the funeral with appropriate solemnity and held Eliza's hand over her father's grave and said the right things, and she had accepted them with the composed attention she brought to everything she did not entirely trust. He had come to the Broad Street office twice since February, describing his visits as family calls. Both times he asked questions about the harbor leases, their duration, their renewal terms, whether the Port Authority had issued any new regulations regarding privately held birth licenses. She had answered pleasantly and told him nothing he could not have found in the public records. But she had written down what he asked, and she had begun watching which records he was consulting. The harbor master at the North Pier was a man named Seth Granger, who had worked the Charleston docks for 22 years, and had been, as he sometimes said, more or less trained by Captain Sherwood to do everything right. He was not educated the way men in counting rooms were educated, but he was observant in the particular way of someone who had spent 2 decades reading weather and reading people. He brought Eliza his observations when they seemed worth bringing. He came to the Broad Street office on a Thursday in March, with his cap in his hands and the look on his face that she recognized as his "I don't know quite how to say this, Mrs. Dray, but I'm going to say it anyway" expression. Had a man come by Tuesday, he said he was with the city assessor's office, asked about the North Berth leases, specifically whether the leases were held in the captain's name or transferred to the estate at time of death. Eliza set down her pen. Did he give a name? Whitten. No papers that I saw. She did not know the name, but she had read in a letter that came to the Broad Street office by mistake, addressed to her uncle, at an address she did not recognize, a reference to the associate I mentioned who handles preliminary inquiries discreetly. "I'd like you to keep a log," she said. "Anyone who comes asking about the leases, the vessels, or any matter relating to title, date, description, what they asked." Seth looked at her steadily. He had worked for her father for 19 years. His son had learned navigation from Captain Sherwood's own charts, borrowed from this office on Eliza's instruction. She had seen Seth as a person, before she ever needed him as an ally, and she thought her father had understood that these things were the same investment. "Is there trouble coming, Mrs. Dray?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'd rather meet it with my eyes open." "Always," he said simply. "Every man on that pier knows whose hands have kept this operation running." She nearly let that land visibly. She held it together. "Keep the log," she said. The lawyer she wrote to was a man named Mr. Harwick Sayers, whose name she had found in her father's correspondence, annotated in the captain's shorthand. Good man. Doesn't talk when silence serves better. He practiced in Columbia but kept a Charleston office for maritime matters, and he responded within the week. He knew the Sherwood operation. He had drafted 2 of the berth lease agreements himself, at Captain Sherwood's instruction, in language the captain had reviewed word by word. He confirmed what Eliza had suspected. The leases had been specifically structured as personal property, transferable through the estate, with language that made their inheritance by a named heir, Eliza, legally unambiguous. He also confirmed something else. Her uncle had made inquiries with the city assessor, and with at least one notary office regarding the provenance of the lease transfer documentation. "Come to Charleston at your earliest convenience," he wrote. "We have work to do." She told Calvin she was meeting with Mr. Sayers about a routine matter of estate administration. He looked up from his newspaper and said, "Is everything in order?" She said, "I'm making sure it is," and he nodded and returned to his paper. She stood in the doorway of the breakfast room after that, looking at the back of his head. He was, objectively, a good man. Not cruel, not faithless. He paid his debts and kept his word, and was kind to his employees in the particular way of someone who did not think about kindness as a practice but simply expressed it when it occurred to him. She had married him knowing it was an arrangement. Her father had approved it precisely because Calvin Dray had resources and no apparent inclination to interfere with what Eliza actually did with her time. What she had not anticipated was spending 3 years invisible inside the arrangement. Not because Calvin meant her harm. Because he had never thought to look. Mr. Sayers told her what he knew without ceremony. Her uncle had engaged a document examiner in Savannah. He had also made contact with a title consulting firm, whose primary service appeared to be identifying, or, if necessary, producing, documentation that could cloud an established chain of ownership. "He's going to challenge the lease transfer," Eliza said. "The berth leases are a different instrument from the will. They were originally granted to your father personally by the Port Authority. The transfer to the estate and then to you was handled correctly, but it involved a secondary filing that Mortimer appears to believe he can contest. That there is a gap, real or manufactured, in the chain of authority. What do you need from me? Every document your father kept relating to the leases, every correspondence with the Port Authority, every renewal filing. She brought the documents the following week, packed in a leather case she had carried herself. She had spent 3 evenings going through her father's files, the way he had taught her to go through anything that mattered. Slowly, twice, with a pen in her hand to mark what needed marking. There was more than she had expected. Captain Sherwood had kept not only the original lease documents, but every letter he had ever exchanged with the Port Authority regarding them. Every renewal, every boundary clarification, every payment receipt, annotated in his hand with dates and reference numbers. He had also kept copies of 2 letters he had written to the city assessor's office, specifically addressing the question of personal versus estate property classification. Letters in which he had sought and received official written confirmation that the leases could be transferred by inheritance. He had begun this documentation more than 6 years before he died. He had known, Eliza realized. He had not known it would be Mortimer. He had simply built his records as though it could be anyone. Mr. Sayers reviewed them for 20 minutes without speaking. When he looked up, he said, "Your father was a very thorough man." He was a practical one, Eliza said. He knew what the world was like. Mortimer arrived at the Broad Street office without warning on a Thursday morning, wearing his good coat and his accommodating smile, and stepped inside the way. Men step into the rooms they have already decided belong to them. I was in the neighborhood. He glanced around with the casual curiosity of someone appraising real estate. I've been meaning to speak with you about the estate. There are matters relating to the harbor operation that merit a family discussion. What sort of matters? The berth leases, he said, with studied vagueness. Whether the current arrangements truly reflect Aldwin's intentions for the long term. She set down her pen, folded her hands on the desk, looked at him directly. The current arrangements, she said, are precisely what my father's estate documents specify. The leases are held in my name. The vessels operate under my authority. Is there something specific you believe is being mismanaged? Something recalibrated behind his eyes. He had come in expecting what? Uncertainty? The reflexive female instinct to smooth things over, to avoid conflict. She could see him adjusting. I only want to ensure you have support, he said. Managing a maritime operation of this scale, without your father's guidance, without a man who understands the trade. I have counsel, she said. Competent legal counsel. I have managed this operation since 2 years before my father's death. I am not managing anything alone. He stayed another quarter hour. He asked questions. Casual, conversational questions about the North Berth boundaries, the Port Authority's renewal schedule, whether she had encountered any difficulty with the assessor's office. She answered each one pleasantly and told him nothing. When he left, she called Seth in from the harbor. The man who came about the assessor's inquiry, she said. Whitten. Did he come through the front gate or the south access road? Seth thought about it. South Road, which is odd, because that road only comes out near the Calder Wharf. The Calder Wharf, he found out by end of day, had been purchased 7 months earlier by a property holding company registered in Columbia. The registered agent was a man named Whitten. That evening, Eliza wrote to Mr. Sayers. The next morning, she wrote to her closest friend, Hannah Birch, who was married to a man who sat on the exchange committee and who knew. As Hannah often noted with the mild amusement of someone who found this more useful than remarkable. Every significant piece of business news in the Harbor District before it reached the papers. I need everything you can learn about a Columbia holding company called Whitten and Associates, Eliza wrote. Who funds it, who uses it, and who in Charleston has been in contact with its principals in the past 8 months. I trust your discretion completely. Hannah's response arrived in 4 days. It was worth every hour of the wait. The formal filing came on a Friday morning in June. Mr. Sayers sent word immediately. Mortimer Sherwood had challenged the berth lease transfer with the Port Authority, asserting a procedural defect in the estate filing. He had produced a secondary document, a notarial instrument, allegedly from several years before Captain Sherwood's death, in which the captain had supposedly acknowledged a prior claim on the North Berth leases from a creditor whose estate Mortimer was now representing. The creditor's name was listed as Cyrus Crane. Eliza had never heard the name. When she met with Mr. Sayers, he laid the instrument on the desk between them. "This is a forgery," he said. "How certain?" "The ink composition is wrong for the date. The notarial seal is a stamp the notary's office retired before this document was supposedly executed." He looked at her steadily. "But it is a careful forgery, good enough to create delay. And delay is what your uncle needs. Enough legal uncertainty that the Port Authority suspends the birth licenses pending review. Enough expense that you settle." He paused. "He does not expect you to fight." "He knows me poorly," Eliza said. The document examiner Mr. Sayers engaged was a woman named Mrs. Dorcas Weld, who operated out of Philadelphia and whose credentials, Mr. Sayers said with the particular emphasis of a man who had watched experts testify for 30 years, were unimpeachable. Her report, completed in 3 weeks, was dense with technical language, ink chemistry, paper fiber aging, the specific wear patterns of official stamps, and at the bottom, in plain terms, she had written, "This document was not produced at the date it bears. Based on the evidence examined, it was produced within the past 14 months. It is a forgery." "She'll testify," Eliza said. "Happily," Mr. Sayers said. "She has a particular dislike for this kind of work." Something in Eliza's chest eased by one precise degree. It was Calvin who told her about his business partner. He came to the back office one Wednesday evening, knocked before entering. He had begun doing that recently, she had noticed, and sat down with the look of a man who had been carrying something difficult the length of the carriage ride home, and was now, finally, setting it down. "I had lunch with Pemberton today," he said. "He mentioned your uncle's filing. More than mentioned it. He described the details in terms that suggested prior knowledge." Calvin's voice was level, controlled, the controlled tone of a man who had understood, somewhere between the exchange and the front door, how completely he had been used. "He has a financial interest in Whitten and Associates." The room was very still. Eliza had sat across from Pemberton at 6 separate dinners in this house. She had ensured the Madeira was properly decanted while he and Calvin discussed harbor tariffs. He had known, must have known, or been told, that the woman managing the evening was also the woman whose property he was helping to strip away. "Did he know the filing was built on forged documents?" she asked. "He says no." A pause. "I believe him. He wouldn't have said as much as he did today if he'd known the full extent." "Then he's a witness," she said, "not a defendant." Calvin looked at her for a long moment. "You thought of that before today?" "I thought of it when Hannah's information arrived," she said. "Pemberton's stake in Whitten and Associates is nominal. He invested on Mortimer's representation that the harbor claim was legitimate. If we can demonstrate the forgery before the hearing, Pemberton withdraws. Without his backing, Mortimer has no credible commercial argument for the Port Authority to weigh." Calvin was quiet. Then he said, "You've been running this since February." "Since March. While I read my newspaper." She did not soften what came next. She had spent 3 years softening things, and she had decided, somewhere between the hallway and the window seat and the locked drawer, that she was through spending that particular currency. "I didn't tell you sooner," she said, "because I didn't know what you would do with it. And I couldn't afford the wrong thing." He did not flinch. He absorbed it the way she had come to understand he absorbed difficult things, by going still, by not defending himself, by sitting with what was true until it settled. "What do you need from me?" he said. One conversation with Pemberton. Not a confrontation, just enough to understand what he had been told, and how far the misrepresentation had traveled. He did it the next morning and came back with exactly what she needed. Mortimer came to the house the week before the hearing. Not to the office. To the house, asking for Eliza privately. She received him in the front parlor and did not offer him a seat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, "about the nature of the filing, the family." "Mortimer," she said his name once quietly. He stopped. "I have Mrs. Dorcas Weld's sworn analysis demonstrating that your notarial instrument was produced 14 months ago, not 5 years ago. I have the original lease documents, every renewal correspondence, and a complete record of the Port Authority's own filings, confirming the transfer to my name. I have a witness who will testify to the representations you made when forming Whitten and Associates." She held his gaze. "I am telling you this because you are my father's brother and he cared for you, and I do not want his name attached to a public fraud proceeding if there is any way to avoid it." She let the pause hold for 3 full seconds. "There isn't." But whether this becomes a matter of complete public record depends entirely on what you do in the next 48 hours. He stared at her with the specific expression of a man who has understood, completely and irreversibly, that he has made a serious miscalculation, not anger. Something closer to bewilderment. You knew, he said. In March, when I came to the office, you already knew. I knew enough, she said. I spent the following 4 months making sure I knew everything. The withdrawal arrived 36 hours later. Seth Granger was at the North Pier when Eliza came to tell him. He had the log open on the dockmaster's desk. Every entry she had asked him to keep, in his careful block handwriting. He closed it when she came in and looked at her face and exhaled. One long, quiet breath. Good, he said. Done, she said. He nodded slowly. Captain would have been pleased. She thought about her father, annotating lease documents at 2 in the morning, writing letters to officials he would never see again, building a record so complete it left no room for a lie to fit inside it. He planned for this, she said. Not this exactly, but something. He knew what the world was, Seth said simply. She sat down, opened the week's manifests, and began at the beginning, working through each line the way her father had taught her, thoroughly, without rushing, because the detail you skipped was always the one that mattered. The social campaign Mortimer ran afterward was slower and more corrosive than the legal challenge had been. The quiet suggestion in certain Charleston drawing rooms that any marriage where a wife had conducted a 5-month legal operation without her husband's knowledge must be a troubled one. These things moved the way rumors moved in a small interconnected city. Not all at once. In layers, each layer reaching a slightly wider circle, each retelling adding a small distortion. Hannah came on a Tuesday afternoon, with the directness of a woman who had decided the kindest thing was to say the difficult thing plainly. He's not disputing the legal outcome, she said. He's found another way to make noise. I conducted legal business regarding my own property, Eliza said. Property that is entirely and legally mine. I know that. Hannah met her eyes. But he's telling people you did it in secret, that any wife who felt she had to act without her husband had reason to. Yes, a pause, that's exactly why it's worked. What Mortimer had not anticipated was Calvin. Not in any grand gesture, in the accumulation of small, consistent things over the weeks that followed. The way he answered when Mr. Dunbar at the Hargrove dinner said, with too much pleasantness, Dray, I understand there's been some excitement about the Sherwood Harbor operation. Didn't know you were in the shipping business. Calvin had looked at him and said, without particular warmth, I'm not. That's Eliza's business. She handles it considerably better than I would. She was 3 feet away. She heard every word. She continued her conversation with the woman beside her and did not look at her husband. But she felt something shift. Not dramatically, not the way things shifted in stories, quietly. The way a door that has been stiff for a long time finally moves when someone applies steady pressure from the right angle. He was trying, not performing trying, actually doing it, in the uncomfortable, imprecise way of a person learning something they should have known years earlier. She did not reward it. She did not punish it. She noted it the way she noted everything that mattered, carefully, without rushing to a conclusion. In November, Calvin came to the back office, knocked and waited. He put a document on her desk without preamble. She unfolded it. It was a formal amendment to their marriage contract, drafted by Mr. Sayers. She recognized the language, expanding the separate property provisions her father had insisted upon before the wedding into an explicit, comprehensive declaration of Eliza's independent legal authority over the Sherwood operation. The right to contract, to litigate, to manage, expand, or dispose of the harbor interests in any manner she chose without requiring spousal consent or authorization of any kind. And in a subordinate clause, written in language as clean as a ship's log, any property Eliza Dray acquired in her own name in future would fall under the same protections. She looked up. You had Mr. Sayers draft this, she said. I contacted him in September. I asked him what the strongest possible legal protection for your independent authority would look like. He sent me the draft. I reviewed it and made one change. He met her eyes. He had included a clause requiring your signature to activate. I removed it. It's already filed, already in effect. You don't need to sign anything. You don't need to do anything. A pause. It's not a gift. It's a correction. She was very still. The property was always yours, he said. I have only made it impossible for anyone to argue otherwise, including me. Especially me. She set the document down on the desk very carefully. She thought about her father in his counting room, insisting on the original separate property provision against the polite suggestions of men who found it unconventional. She thought about him sitting at this desk at 2 in the morning, annotating lease documents, writing letters to notaries he would never see again, building a record as if the world could not be trusted to simply recognize what was right. He had built what he could. Calvin, 4 years later, in an office filled with sea charts and cargo contracts and the particular smell of harbor work, had built the rest. "Thank you," she said. Not the careful, measured kind she had used before. The kind that acknowledged a specific action without committing to anything beyond the moment. This was different. She let it be different. She let it carry what it actually carried. He stood to go. "Stay," she said. "I'm reviewing the cargo contracts for the spring season. I'd like your opinion on the freight rate proposal." He turned back. There was something in his face she had not seen before. Not relief. Not triumph. Not the comfortable satisfaction of a man who had gotten what he wanted. Something quieter. The expression of someone standing at the beginning of something they did not yet fully understand, finding, to their own mild surprise, that the uncertainty did not frighten them. He sat back down. She set the contracts on the desk between them. The spring season opened well. The North Pier ran its cargo schedule without interruption. Seth Granger's log recorded nothing but ordinary harbor business. The vessels moved in and out on Captain Sherwood's routes, carrying freight on contracts Eliza had renegotiated over the winter for rates that were, across the board, 7% better than the previous year. Hannah came to the Broad Street office on a morning in April and sat across from Eliza with a cup of tea and the frank, affectionate attention of a woman who had known her long enough to notice things she did not advertise. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," Eliza said. "Good different or complicated different?" "Both, which I'm told is what progress actually looks like." Hannah laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "And Calvin?" Eliza considered the question honestly. "He asks questions about the harbor contracts. Real questions, not the conversational kind. He reads the manifests. Last week he told me he'd spoken to the port commissioner about the proposed tariff changes before I'd had a chance to mention them to him." She paused. "He'd been paying attention." "How does that feel?" "Strange," Eliza said. "Like a window that's been stuck for a long time finally opening. You're glad it's open, but you're also standing there wondering why it took so long and adjusting to the draft." Hannah laughed again. "That," she said, "is the most accurate description of marriage I have ever heard." Eliza smiled. The real kind, not the composed, appropriate smile she had worn in drawing rooms for 3 years, the one she had learned to produce so reliably that she sometimes forgot she was producing it. This was the other kind, the kind that came from somewhere actual. On the last morning of April, Eliza unlocked the bottom drawer of the back office desk and took out the file she had been building since March of the previous year. She read through it in order. The first letter to Mr. Sayers, Seth's log entries in his block handwriting, Hannah's intelligence on Witten and Associates, the Port Authority filings, Mrs. Weld's analysis. Every document, end to end. She tied the file with cord and placed it in the main cabinet with her father's records. All of it together now. One complete record. She closed the cabinet and stood at the window, looking out at the harbor. The North Pier was running its morning schedule. She could see the purposeful movement of men and cargo and vessels that her father had organized, and she had kept running and would continue to keep running, on her own terms, in her own name, with no gap in the documentation for anyone to exploit. She heard Calvin's step in the hallway. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He appeared in the doorway with his coat on and his hat in his hand, ready for wherever the morning was taking him, and he looked at her with the particular quality of attention she was still, even now, getting used to. The attention of a man who had stopped assuming he already knew what he would find. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. She took her own hat from the hook by the door, and they walked out together into the April morning, not maintaining the careful, managed distance of two people in a polished arrangement, but actually together, the gap between them closed by something built not in one conversation, but in the long, unglamorous, meticulous work of choosing, day after day, to look at each other clearly. The harbor was running. The ledgers were in order. The key to the locked drawer was on its ribbon, close to her heart, where it had always been, not because anything needed guarding anymore, but because some things you carry not out of fear, but out of love for what they represent, and who first placed them in your hands. Captain Sherwood's daughter had not needed anyone to rescue her, but she had always deserved someone willing, finally, to see her. She had both now, and on that April morning, with Charleston Harbor coming alive in every direction, and the sound of the pier behind her, and the road ahead, that was exactly enough.